Alabama A&M had 2 goals when it came to building their recruiting class: improve the passing game and add talent to the linebacker room. Also, Southern has been overtaken for the top spot in the SWAC by Alcorn State. Oh yeah, it's Locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked on HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked on HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And now, of course, I'm Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked on HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey's over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives, which you can see right here at the bottom of the screen. But if you're on the audio side of things, don't forget the S on the end of South Exclusives. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. And I want to talk to you guys about Alabama A&M's recruiting class because they focus heavily on 2 objectives: improve the passing game and then also add talent to the linebacker room, both of which I think were very important. And we're going to talk about the quarterback position first because why not? It's the most important position on the field. It should take precedent when having this type of conversation. But first, let me break down to you exactly what their recruiting class looked like. It's very even, very, very even as far as the distribution between offense and defense. You have 3 quarterbacks, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 3 defensive backs, 2 offensive linemen, 5 linebackers. Now, what you'll see is 2 things. It's 9 offensive players, 8 defensive players, but the offensive players are more spread out as far as position goes. When you look at defense, it's linebackers, defensive backs, period. While you look at offense, you got quarterbacks, wide receivers, offensive linemen. You even have a tight end in there. So it's way more spread out. It's a whole lot of variety as opposed to just heavy emphasis on one position, which kind of lends itself to the second point we're going to make within this segment. But let's start off on the quarterback position because, hey, Alabama A&M fans, I'm right here with you. I'm a Saints fan. I know exactly what position you're in right now. You don't usually go from a great quarterback to another great quarterback. In the time in between those 2 great quarterbacks that you hope that you eventually get, it feels like it's moving in slow motion. It's only been a year, but if I had to put myself in your shoes, it would likely feel like 3-4 years because I've grown accustomed to seeing Aqeel Glass. I've grown accustomed to seeing his level of play. I've grown accustomed to feeling comfortable in my quarterback position. But now I have to find that comfort again. And it's not easy. It's not often that you go from Favre to Rodgers or go Montana to Young. That's a rarity. More often it's Elway to Manning. It's Kelly to Allen. It's Breeze to who knows next. Now, I don't want to sound overly pessimistic. I do think that it's a little bit shorter of a wait when we're talking about college. But the point is the same. It's very rare that you just go great to great quarterback play. So you got to wait a little bit. However, the way to make sure that that process moves faster is by overloading talent. So let's go over the 3 quarterbacks that Alabama A&M decided to bring into the mix. And only one is a freshman, but I actually really like this kid. Corey Chavis, I believe it's Chavis is how you say his last name. I like him. I saw his huddle highlights. I thought he looked really good throwing the ball over the middle of the field. I thought he had a really nice deep ball. I was like, okay, now, of course, these are highlights. These are highlights, and that's how highlights work. But it was the same type of play over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. But I liked the play. I liked his ability to have nice ball placement across the middle. It wasn't always right here on the chest. If there was somebody coming across the front of the defense, or the front of the wide receiver, he would throw it on that guy's back shoulder coming across the middle. That shows awareness. I liked his ball placement. Let's not just say, oh, he did this and he did this and he did this. It's way too broad to just only say the range of the field that he was throwing to. Now, when he did throw the ball deep, whether that was up the seam or whether that was to the outside, wide side, short side, whatever, he had nice arm strength doing it, and he always put it in a pretty good position. I just thought I thought his ball placement was top tier. So this is a guy that I think you should be looking out for, Corey Chavis. He won't be there in spring practice, but at the same time, I did feel like he's already signed. We know he's coming. I think this is I don't want to call him a dark horse because they don't have just a runaway guy. But this is somebody I definitely will have my eye on when the fall rolls around. The other two players are different from Chavis. In one way, they're different. They've had collegiate experience. But then also, they're not stand in the pocket quarterbacks. You watch his highlight tape, it's not running. It's him stepping back and chunking that thing, period. Whether that's across the middle, deep, or whatever. He had like 2 plays on his highlight tape where he actually ran. This is not his cup of tea. But then you go and you look at a couple of other players. So you look at Dustin Fletcher. You look at Brian Plummer. Those are 2 dual threat quarterbacks. They do have technically college experience, but they didn't play too much in college. But you look at a guy like Fletcher, threw for over 7,000, ran for over 2,000. Then you look at Plummer. He was a high school champion in Maryland as a sophomore, so he has that winning pedigree. These are going to be players who are going to be added into the mix, and it should not be someone's job to lose. It should be a full-on competition with everybody having an equal chance to win it. I want to watch that. But then also, you see they added up on linebackers. They had 5 linebackers. Alabama A&M brought in 5 linebackers. That shows a dedication, and the reason you have to do it is because your leading tackler was a linebacker last year. However, he was a senior. And it took a while before you got to the next guy after him. It was a bunch of safeties. If a bunch of safeties are high in your tackle rate, that's not a good thing. I personally, unless it's a guy like Derwin James for the Chargers, I never want my safety to be my leading tackler, because more likely than not, that means I'm having a lot of runs that are getting 7-8 yards down the field because they are my third line of defense. So I don't like that. That's already a bad thing for me. However, the 2 top tackling linebackers were both seniors, so you have to replenish that group. In bringing in 5, all of which who are transfers, none of them are high school players, you have 5 transfer linebackers. Don't be surprised to see 2, maybe 3 of them getting a lot of run during the season because they have to replenish that room. That's why they dedicated so many resources to it in the National Signing Day period. 5 linebackers, and you're only going to have 3 on the field, but you're bringing in 5, and we'll see how many of those guys are actually going to be impact players. But if I told you, or like I just told you, I do think it's going to be more than just 1, at least that's given that chance. So you're looking at 3 quarterbacks, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 3 defensive backs, 2 offensive linemen, and 5 linebackers. Hey, like I said, you want to improve the passing game, it's more than just a quarterback. You also have to bring in receiving weapons. So you have 3 of those guys who are wide receivers and 1 who's a tight end. It all goes hand in hand. You want to get talented quarterback play, but then you also want to make sure he has weapons who you don't want your quarterback to always have to be the guy making something happen. Let's make some things easy on him as well. That's how you improve the passing game. And then just putting bodies into the linebacker room is pretty self-explanatory. And going forward, we're going to keep it in the SWAC, but we're going to be talking about basketball because Alcorn State has taken over the top spot in the SWAC standings from Southern, and I personally like it from a media standpoint. We're going to talk about that as we continue with Locked on HBCU. Before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, which you can see right here at the bottom of the screen. Make every moment more. I told you, we're only talking about the Super Bowl. So let me know, who do you think is going to be the MVP? I think more likely than not, it's going to be the starting quarterback, not only because that's just how things go, but also I look at these two offenses and I think that whichever team wins is going to have a strong offensive performance. But I'll give you my underdog, Hassan Reddick. So if you want to put some money on the underdog, dark horse type of Super Bowl MVP, that's the guy that I would go to. Hassan Reddick, who's going to score the first touchdown? Who's going to have more yards? What's going to be the combined amount of points scored? There's so many things that you can do, and you can do all of these bets. All of these bets will be present on FanDuel. Make every moment more when you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. And if you make a $5 bet, you'll get $300 back in free bets. It's a win-win. Ain't no such thing as losing. Just go ahead and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On College Basketball. Wherever you get your podcast, basically wherever you're listening or watching me right now, just look up Locked On College Basketball to make it easy on yourself. But it's everything you need around the sport in one place wherever you get your podcast. And we're going to talk a little bit of basketball for the rest of the show. We're going to start off with Alcorn overtaking the Southern Jaguars for the #1 spot in the SWAC. And I love it from a media standpoint, not because of any ill will to Southern or any love for Alcorn. I really don't care less about either one of these teams as far as who's going to be #1, who's going to be #2. I just love a storyline. I love a change of pace. And I think it's that wrestling fan in me that was a kid and still likes wrestling to this day that places such an emphasis on storylines. Because that's a big thing. Oh, I like that storyline. I don't really like that storyline. This storyline doesn't work. It's all about storyline and character development and things of that nature. And I think that being in me from a young age is just carried over into media and to a point where at certain times, I have more intrigue in the storyline than the actual game. Not all the time. It's actually kind of pretty rare, but it happens enough to where I notice it 100%. And this is one of the storylines that I love because Alcorn, Southern, two teams are just as good as we expected them to be coming into the season. Alcorn was the second-ranked team, and Southern was the third-ranked team in the preseason polls. Well, right now, they're 1-2. But they're on different trajectories. You got Alcorn going up. You got Southern coming down. It's two completely different things. Alcorn on a 3-game win streak. Southern on a 2-game losing streak. Ironically, the last game that Alcorn lost was to Southern. But they haven't lost in about 2 weeks, and that 3-game winning streak has really been propelled by some strong and explosive offensive performances. You look at their last game versus Mississippi Valley State. The last game they played against Mississippi Valley State, they absolutely dominated in the second half. The first half, it was a close game. It was a little back and forth in the first half. Yes, Alcorn was going toe-to-toe Mississippi Valley State. I don't know what was said at halftime. But that back and forth, that good game stuff I was talking about, out of the window. The Braves offense went ballistic, and they opened up a 20-point lead on Mississippi Valley State. They ain't really looked back. I think the final score might have been less than 15 as far as margin of victory. But that score wasn't indicative. It wasn't close. It wasn't close. They dominated that game. They were explosive on offense. And I told you it's been kind of a trend. You look at the game versus Arkansas Pine Bluff. They opened up a huge lead on Arkansas Pine Bluff. Now, in that game, they did look back because it got really tight at the end. But the offensive explosion, that strong offense, I don't even want to say explosion because explosion is an impactful word. Let's just say strong offense. I don't want it to be debatable. They had strong offensive performances that either got them a big-time lead that they were just able to completely sustain, like against Mississippi Valley State, or you had a strong offensive performance that allowed you enough of a cushion to where, you know what, I'm not giving up a 20-point lead versus University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. I'm just not doing it. But either way, that offense played a part. You look at the first game of the win streak against Grambling. You had offense that had you come back in that game. Offense continuously popped up, and not just, well, you have to play offense in every game. No, I would say that there was defining offensive moments in each of these 3-game win streaks. And with that, you've now taken over. The reason I like the change of pace is because you now have Alcorn going from the hunter to the hunted. Kind of, you're still only 1 game up from Southern. It's not like Southern is just out of it or something. Southern's right there. And they beat Alcorn this year. Just one slip and Southern's right back on top. but it's the back and forth nature. It gets a little bit stale talking about the same team being number one. From a fan of the game, I could care less about one team dominating. It's kind of like Alabama. I feel like everybody hates Alabama because Alabama's good. If you're not a rival of Alabama, you're just hating on them for being very successful and winning a lot of championships. I would never envy a team for being successful. Never. So I would never have a problem with one team being the best team in the conference basically all year long. But from a media standpoint, I wouldn't be able to talk about these type of situations if they didn't happen. And I enjoy talking about the back and forth nature because now it places a greater emphasis on each game, specifically when these two teams face off again. If the rankings are still the same, where they're 1 and 2 and one game of separation between them. I like that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to have this storyline to talk about. But you look at Southern, you've lost 2 games in a row, and honestly, they ain't been pretty. That first game against Alabama A&M, you lose by 21 points, getting dogged. Against Alabama State, you keep it a little bit closer. Sorry, Mo. Sorry, John. I got love for y'all. Y'all my guys, y'all always support and whatnot. But Southern got to get it together. Mo's probably a little bit conflicted because he was able to have Alabama A&M. He probably hated it. He had to cover his alma mater getting smacked up. But Mo will probably text me about this. But in all seriousness, it's just 2 different directions. It's not like you can't course correct. A 2-game losing streak ain't nothing. That's nothing to really sweat about, but it does exist. You have to admit that it does exist. That's all I'm saying. And with that, you now have Alcorn on top of the SWAC, the number 1 seed. They have a 1-game lead, a full game lead as far as record goes on Southern. That's important because we already discussed the impact of tiebreakers. And there's no better, no greater discussion about tiebreakers than Virginia State and Virginia Union. Unfortunately for the Trojans, they did just lose to Shaw, and now I believe they have to be completely perfect if they still want to get the number 1 seed in the CIAA tournament. We'll talk about that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. And as we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate all of my segment 3 folks because you made it your first listen of the day and you made it all the way to the end. So thank you 2 times for that. And I want to talk about Virginia State because with this loss that they just suffered to Shaw in overtime, I think they have to be pretty much perfect if they want to win the CIAA regular season title, and that means being the number 1 seed and everything that comes with that, all of those perks. But this is a game between 2 really good teams. This was a game between 2 really good teams, but one team needed it way more. See, a win helped Virginia State way more than a win helped Shaw. And a loss hurt Virginia State way more than a loss would hurt Shaw. Shaw kind of knows where they're going to be. Shaw is going to be where Shaw is going to be. Of course, they can jockey for a little bit of position, and this helps. But for the most part, they don't have as much to lose as Virginia State. Virginia State is still fighting for that number 1 seed. That ain't in the plans for Shaw. Shaw might be able to get into the tournament and make some noise. I definitely think that. But the number 1 seed, nah, they ain't in the cards. They ain't got to worry about that. So that's why I think that the stakes were significantly higher for Virginia State. But let's talk about this game before we talk about the ramifications of it, really, because I don't want to cut Shaw short. And once they got to overtime, Shaw was able to secure this victory by being so good at the free throw line. Not only being proficient once you got there, but showing the ability to get there frequently was just as important. See, Shaw had 8 free throw attempts in overtime alone. Virginia State only had 8 field goal attempts. See, Shaw scored 12 points, but they're only credited with 3 shot attempts. And that's because you don't get credited for a shot attempt when you go to the line. And it's not as if they're playing the field goal or the free throw game where, oh, I'm up by X amount of points and it's late. Actually, Virginia State was up with 30 seconds left in the game. Other than those last 2 free throw attempts, none of the other ones came from intentional fouls. They were just getting to the line, and they were just knocking down their shots. They made 7 of the 8 attempts that they had in overtime. That's important. That's the difference. And another difference between how the 2 teams scored was just Virginia State had 3 guys who did all the work. They scored all the points in overtime. They were the 3 high scorers. They had, I think, 16, 20-something, and then 30. Like, they scored a bunch of points. Meanwhile, Shaw, they didn't have nobody scoring the 20s, but they had a bunch of players hovering around 9. A couple players getting to the teens. It was just a different way of scoring. But Like I said, we're going to get to these ramifications because this game does have big-time ramifications, mostly for Virginia State. Now you have to be perfect. When you're looking at the rest of Virginia State's season, if they want to get the number 1 seed, if they want to be that CIAA regular season champion over Virginia Union, you're going to need pretty much perfection. I just don't see a situation where Union loses 3 out of 4 games. That's the only way for State to be able to lose or not be perfect and still win that conference championship. If they don't do that, Union is going to win this. And honestly, I'm not predicting any team as good as Union to lose 3 out of 4 games. I'm not. So the result of Virginia State losing to Shaw is now they're a game behind Virginia Union. They lost to Virginia Union earlier in the year. They're going to absolutely have to beat Virginia Union in the last game of the season if they want to win the CIAA. That's the only path. There was a way where you could have made it and you might have been able to get the number 1 seed while still losing to Union. But now that you lost to Shaw, it's just not going to happen because I would never predict the team. I wouldn't have done this to State. I'm not going to do it to Union. I'm not predicting anybody to lose 3 out of 4. Not a team as good as them. It can happen, don't get me wrong. It definitely could. But now you want them to lose 2 out of 4, and you have to be one of the 2 games. Because if you're not one of the 2 games, you're going to have 5 losses. There is absolutely no way. Technically there is, but you know what I mean. There is absolutely no way that Virginia State wins the CIAA regular season. Only talking about the number 1 seed, only talking about the regular season. There is no way that they win the regular season title with 5 conference losses. The next team in the South will probably have a better shot than them. That's just the way that I look at it. I think that now that Virginia State has lost, this is Virginia Union's championship to lose. All you have to do is basically, if you win the next 3 games, you clinch the number 1 seed. You now completely control your own destiny, and you can clinch it before you even get into the last game. It wouldn't shock me if they lose a game. They could lose to Shaw, but I don't think they lose 2 games, which means that Virginia State's going to have to be perfect. To sum it up in a little bit of analogy and keep it in the basketball terms, Virginia State had a foul to give. They don't anymore. Any more losses, you're putting Virginia Union into the bonus. In other words, any more losses, and you're only further distancing yourself from the ability to be the number 1 seed in the CIAA tournament. But I appreciate you for making us your first listen of the day. Every day on tomorrow. Today's Friday. On Monday's episode, we'll be back breaking down some of the weekend's action. Man, Friday kind of snuck up on me, but shout out to Friday. Have me a couple days off. But I appreciate y'all for making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball, which is everything you need around the sport in one place, wherever you get your podcast. Just type it in wherever you're listening or watching me right now, and then go ahead and play it immediately. You can even set it up to play next if you're on the audio side of things. But in the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.